Hi, I'm Ken Howard, and welcome to the Gay Therapy LA podcast. Today, I'd like to talk about gay men's sexual mental health, the triumvirate of self, partner, and others. Let me give you a little bit of just sex therapy background and what I mean by sexual mental health. So, as a very long-term, 29 years in 2021, gay men's specialist therapist, and relatively recently becoming an AASECT certified sex therapist. That's AASECT, A-A-S-E-C-T. That's the national association that gives the certified sex therapist credential. And that stands for the American Association of Sex Educators, Counselors, and Therapists. And I have worked with hundreds, or at this point thousands, of gay men to improve their overall quality of life by improving the quality of their sex life, both in terms of their individual functioning and in the context of others, whether in hookups or dating or long-term relationships. And most of my clients come to see me because they want the ease of talking to another gay man and to be really frank in ways that they just don't feel as comfortable being with women therapists or straight male therapists or even gay male therapists who are not specialists in gay men or capable, interested, or certified in sex therapy. You would be surprised at how many therapists, including, licensed couples therapists, have no training or even interest in sex therapy topics, yet many couples want help with those areas and expect their therapist to be well informed in sexuality when they're not. They just don't have the training. Up to 70% of graduate master's programs for therapists do not include any sexology or sex therapy training. So that's why I went on to get the additional credential in that. And I'm happy to be that resource because it can be a big relief to find someone who just gets it in terms of sex therapy, especially in an affirmative, non-judgmental, specifically gay male cultural context. I see others for sex therapy, straight couples or straight men, straight women, non-binary people, trans men and women, the whole gamut of demographics, but I specialize in gay male individuals and gay male couples. And sex therapists like me who get the AASECT certification have undergone an 18-month training program under clinical supervision and have been trained in a variety of anatomy, cultural, physical, psychological, and social aspects of sexual functioning, learning how to help clients of all kinds with challenges through various clinical intervention models that support the principles of sexual health. Let's talk about some themes in sex therapy. Many themes arise in sex therapy sessions or couples therapy sessions, and there's lots of overlap in these, and it's kind of my job to navigate when I'm drawing from models of couples therapy, and I've taught evidence-based models in couples therapy at USC in LA in their graduate school of social work, versus models of sex therapy specifically, and this integration of the different models of how people are treated for different what we call presenting issues. And themes that characterize sessions involve frankness, just being very frank, just being out there with what you're feeling, a discussion of what is emotional and physical intimacy, and what just feels right versus what brings anxiety, pain, annoyance, boredom, or frustration in your sex life. Overcoming shame and helping clients understand that many challenges that a client might think are unique are actually quite common, but they're just not talked about. I always say that my work gives me a keyhole view on the sex lives of people in general and gay men and gay couples in particular, because these are topics that you might not discuss outside your bedroom with anyone else but a partner. People always tend to think that their fantasies and their challenges and their kinks and their erotic interests are unique, and they worry that they're freakish, when research shows they are shared by many. I have a colleague, Justin Laymiller, who is a sexologist and an academic and researcher, and handsome guy, by the way. But I've seen him give talks a lot about his own research, and a lot of his research informs the book that he wrote, Tell Me What You Want. Now, the Tell Me What You Want book is based on his research of, I think, about 4,000 people and their sexual fantasies. So if you want to look that up, Laymiller is Lehmiller. He also does the Sex and Psychology podcast, if you're interested in that. And that was important research because he was one of the first researchers in a long time to get funding to research sexual fantasies. Because, in the world of research funding, governments, especially more conservative members of government, aren't eager to fund sexuality research. So he's a pioneer in that and brought us a lot of excellent research that I think ultimately, in my opinion, had the effect of helping people to feel that their fantasies were much more normal, almost common, than maybe they originally thought. Because overcoming shame is an important theme. Trust is also a big theme. To address the problems, we discuss behaviors and actions to take that are practical and draw on multiple disciplines that kind of bridge medicine and psychology. And there's a blending of the medical, although I am careful to know when I need to defer to an MD. That's kind of what we call a scope of practice issue. I wouldn't presume to give information that's more appropriately the purview of a medical doctor. But I would look at the emotional and the psychological and the interrelational aspects, the community and social aspects, certainly the cultural when we're talking about gay men, a lot of LGBT culture in general and gay men in particular, and even the spiritual when we talk about our sex lives, because even those of us who are not religious might still be influenced by the religion that we were brought up with, particularly in ideas about sex, particularly about ideas about guilt. And these are all about how we experience ourselves when we're alone and in the context of one or more. So let's talk about sex therapy in the context of the principles of sexual health. So much of the training of sex therapists involves not only the melding of the psychological and the medical and the anatomical and the social and the cultural, but also the philosophical and the ethical. The principles of what comprises sexual health are discussed in various articles and books and materials. And the standard these days that is quoted often is relatively new, and it comes from Doug Braun Harvey, who's a marriage and family therapist in San Diego, I believe. Braun, Braun-Harvey, H-R-V-A-Y. That's Doug, and his book that he co-authored with Michael Vigorito, V-I-G-O-R-I-T-O, Vigorito. Doug Braun Harvey and Michael Vigorito wrote a book called Treating Out of Control Sexual Behavior. And that contains a section on the 6 principles of sexual health, according to them, but yet a lot of people would agree. And these are, number 1, consent. We hear about the Me Too movement and age of consent laws and a lot of issues, but they say a part of sexual health is the partners, often 2, but it could be more, in a group scene, that they're consenting. Nobody's under the influence, nobody's being somehow coerced, trafficked or drugged up or something like that, but that would imply that they weren't consenting adults. And I sometimes mention consenting adolescents because adolescents can be sexually active, but statutory rape laws and age of consent laws would apply in every state about that. And even other nationalities would have different ages for the age of consent. Sometimes there's even a difference in the age of consent between straight people and gay people, which is inherently unfair. But anyway, consent is the number 1. Number 2 is that it's non-exploitive. We hear so much about exploitive sexual situations, which is a terrible crime, human trafficking or pimping or some kind of manipulation, but a principle of sexual health means that it's not exploitive. Number 3 is honest. There's not a lot of lying and duplicity and a lot of crap going around. It's just honest. Number 4 is that there are shared values involved. You've got consenting people who share some kind of values around what they feel. Number 5 is sexual health includes protection from sexually transmitted infections, including HIV and the others, to a reasonable extent. Sometimes STIs happen and you get screened and you get treated. It's not the end of the world if you pick up one of them, but we want to work very hard. As someone myself living with HIV for 30 years now, this is my 31st year, you want to work hard to avoid HIV, either through condoms or the use of PrEP or, various ways. Because HIV is not fun to live with, even though I'm a very healthy guy to this day. I was going to say old man, but healthy guy to this day. And of course, unwanted pregnancy with straight people. Sexual health would prevent an unwanted pregnancy. And number 6, and this is kind of the big one, is pleasure. A principle of sexual health is it pleasurable for both parties in reasonably equal measure? And I think these are not the only aspects of sexual health, but they're commonly accepted and referred to. And they're compelling because they cover a lot of important considerations, and both clinicians and their clients can work from these principles as reliable guidelines that help answer questions about behaviors and situations. We want to ask ourselves in any different scenario, does this meet the 6 principles of sexual health according to Braun, Harvey, and Vigorito? And it'll give you some insight whether they do or whether they don't, and then what to do about that. If what you're doing in the situation you're in meets all of those principles, then you can generally have more of a confidence that what you're doing might be right for you. But if one or more of those principles is really falling down, then that might not be the most mentally healthy experience for you to have. You may be tolerating something you don't need to tolerate. And I might add to the principles of sexual health an aspect of community or the spiritual or the cultural context. Because in gay male sex, there's often a social or cultural or fraternal or even historical context, because for so long our gay sex was inherently illegal, and it still is in many countries of the world. And it's still considered illegal in some churches or religious sex, SECTS. The pervasive sexual shame that affects all sex historically in the United States. The United States has a lot of issues about sexual shame. And it's even more so among the LGBT population, and gay men in particular. So when we take these principles of sexual health and we think about them for ourselves, we might reflect on to what degree we've mastered each one of those, especially that last one, pleasure. I work with guys who have many sexual complaints about their sexual identity, their sense of self, and understanding how they see themselves as sexual beings and how they conduct their usual sexual practices. The need for some kind of work for sex to be emotionally and physically pleasurable and rewarding and stable on an ongoing basis throughout the lifespan, not just when you're young, is important. Recently, I was working with one of my gay male couples, I call them my guys, on this idea that your sexual self is based on 3 components. 1, that with yourself in masturbation or solo sex. 2, that with a partner or spouse. And 3, often, but not always, that with others. So while I work with gay male couples who are both monogamous or open, what we call consensual non-monogamy, and I've got previous podcast episodes on issues in non-monogamy and even one on hotter monogamy, if you look at the episode list. There are many variations of relationship style along the spectrum of open versus monogamous. Each couple has its own understanding and arrangement of exactly what they mean by monogamous or open. There is not one definition that fits everyone. And if you go to gaytherapyla.com/blog and search on open relationship or even monogamy, there are several articles: how to have an open relationship without hurt feelings, parts 1 and 2, and one on troubleshooting issues in open relationships, common challenges that come up just on a more practical level that I've helped my clients with, and what they've done to kind of get over the hump, so to speak. And I get the question a lot about which kind of relationship is better, the monogamous or the open, because I've had the opportunity to work with so many hundreds of gay male couples throughout my career. And the answer is always, you have to do what works for you both. And even that can change and evolve over time, especially if you met your partner or spouse when you were young men and you've both grown into middle age or later. I have an article and a podcast on gay men at midlife called Golden Boys. Search on the blog page for Golden Boys. There's a lot of issues that happen for gay men at midlife, navigating the young man that you were with the older man that you're becoming. And your sex life is part of that. And this is why so many gay male couples need couples therapy in general and sex therapy in particular, because your sex life is not a set it and forget it kind of thing. Your sex life is a living thing that needs support and figuring out and revisiting as your needs and your strengths and your vulnerabilities and developmental changes take place at key ages of your life and in key phases of your relationship. People go through very predictable psychological developmental phases, the midlife crisis and that kind of thing. Certainly in adolescence, we'd say. But relationships do too. You've heard of the 7-year itch, but the 7-year itch can be at 3 years or 5 years or 12 years. And there's certain very predictable things that happen to couples. If all I know about a couple is that they've been together for 12 years, I've got some ideas about what they might be going through. So it's a therapist's job to educate folks on how the phases of a relationship, or how the developmental stages of people, in this case gay men, what they go through very predictably. Now, you might not be a textbook case of the midlife crisis or in the midlife transition, but it's a safe bet that some of the very predictable developmental changes are things you might be going through, especially on what we call the 0 birthdays, turning 30. I just started with somebody on that the other day, and certainly turning 40. 50 and 60, well, I'll let you know when I get to 60, but 50 is overall less dramatic than 40, but 30 and 40 tend to be the ones where guys need a lot of support, because those really are transitions in life. And sometimes it's nice to know just what to expect of yourself and each other in a relationship as you progress through life developmentally. This is why in my work, I rely pretty heavily on developmental and existential psychology themes, and we talk a lot about what healthy aging means at every phase of life. I work with guys in their 20s on what healthy aging is like, because you kind of cast the die when you're young about how healthy you're going to be, including how financially healthy you're going to be by middle age or seniorhood. So you don't want to take life for granted, but at the same time you want to balance the fact that even as a young man, you're going to be an older man sometime. And even as an older man, there's still aspects of healthy aging that help you to have a better time of it than, the other 80-year-old down the block, right? So let's look a little more at the 3 areas of sexual functioning: self, partner, others. So gay men are left with, at any given time, having to reflect and self-evaluate how they feel about their own solo sex, the role of masturbation in your life, and that would be true even if you're in a relationship. How their sex life is with their primary partner or spouse, I kind of use those terms interchangeably, and how, if any, it is with outside partners in 3 ways or group sex or individual hookups or tricks without their partner. And that wouldn't apply to everybody, but it would apply to a lot of guys in the gay community worldwide. Single guys would have a variation on this involving themselves in both dates and hookups, which are not always the same thing. And one way of thinking about this is about gaps. In each of those three main sexual functioning areas, where are you versus where you would like to be? Your work, or really our work when we're working in session, can be about how you can close those gaps and learn to live a sexual lifestyle that is optimal in each of those areas, by yourself, with your partner, and with others, by taking them to a new level of comfort and confidence and satisfaction. And any one of them can be off. I worked with someone just recently about his masturbatory life and the quality of it. And that can be a very important kind of me time. And of course, sex with a primary partner is an important consideration, or maybe just intimacy. Some guys don't have as much sex with a primary partner as they have a physical intimacy. And then what happens with tricks or outside partners, or even group scenes? Is that fun for you? Do you like doing that, but there's an aspect to it that you don't like? Some guys might like going to a sex club, but they don't like the fact that pickpockets tend to hang out at those places. So there's kind of pros and cons to all of the options here. Let's look at these a little more depth. With yourself, now, although it might sound awkward at first to think about the quality of your own masturbation, it actually can be a topic in therapy. I've worked with guys who have guilt about having the wrong fantasies, so to speak, if they contain controversial or even aggressive or violent or humiliating content to their fantasies, even though that's very common. Other guys might have complaints about physical pain from something about their anatomy, like Peyronie's disease, the curvature of the penis, or something in the anal rectal area. If they're using butt plugs or vibrating toys, they might have trouble attaining or sustaining erections even by themselves, or they may have difficulty reaching orgasm, which can be a side effect of the SSRI family of antidepressant medications like Prozac or Zoloft. Other guys might have an interest in toys or sleeve devices, vibrators, anal plugs, but not know enough about them or how to use them. But they would be commercially available on various websites, and those websites are always developing new products like Fort Trough or Mr. S, because they're there to sell product, and sometimes they sell more product by developing new toys that are new ways to get off. Others might have feelings about using porn, and from which genre of porn. Is there a right and wrong genre of porn? Now, it would be problematic with porn genres that are illegal, like kiddie porn and stuff like that, or snuff, or, the real edgy stuff. That stuff is illegal to possess. So we're not really talking about that. We're talking about porn that is, legal to produce and possess, of many different kinds of genre, but it involves consent from all concerned. Even the porn you consume needs to have consent from the performers really to be in sexual health. And one of my colleagues, David Ley, L-E-Y, Dr. David Ley, wrote a great book called Ethical Porn for Dicks. And that's available on Amazon or wherever you get books. But Dr. Ley, L-E-Y, wrote Ethical Porn for Dicks to kind of address some of the myths. Too much porn makes you have erectile dysfunction, or there's just a lot of very radical and extreme, really extreme rage that comes from the idea of porn. And I don't really get into that quite so much, but I know that it is a social controversy. But Dr. Ley kind of addresses the idea and the concept of what is ethical porn, but for guys. But the sexual life that you have with yourself is actually a variable in your overall global sexual health. And considerations in this might be addressing the physical and the emotional and the cultural or even the spiritual topics that come to mind. Some little boys around the world grow up with a spiritual admonition about masturbation. Don't do that, you'll go to hell. All of this stuff, and it really kind of suppresses the natural sexual development of the male, because as one of the Surgeon Generals years ago, Jocelyn Elders, got in a lot of trouble for saying masturbation is healthy, and it is, but the right-wing political backlash basically had her lose her job. But she was making a point that it is a healthy thing in the emotional and physical development of the cisgender male. So if you, and the issue about, the gender identity in trans or non-binary people, some people would say people with vaginas or people with penises. I'm kind of having a bias here about cisgender identified, gay male identified people. The role in sexual functioning in some of the other demographics in trans or non-binary people, some of this would apply, a lot of it would apply, but I'm, for purposes of quasi-brevity, I'm really focusing on cisgender gay men here. So if you reflect and self-assess, think about what works and what doesn't in your own relationship to your solo sex practices. Give yourself permission for this to be a malleable, evolving practice that can rely on the old standbys that you use to get off. But it also might involve, once in a while, exploring something new that could feel fun or innovative, or an exploration of your own sexual identity, even by yourself. But let's look at it, sex with partners, partner or partners. The challenge is that couples, two people, or the polycule, a group of more than two people in a relationship, and I work with guys in those situations too, that they might face sexually is even more varied because you have two or more people involved in the group. There might also involve a self-assessment of how things are going for both you and your partner, physically, emotionally, even practically. Perhaps surprisingly, one of the themes I help gay male couples with is simply time management. Today's gay men overall, especially in the major urban centers, I think, of the United States, they tend to work long hours in every field and nationwide. And this is kind of an economic and historic set of circumstances that generations before the current one might not have had as much, when everybody seemingly, there's that meme going around of old economy Steve, who, could work 9 to 5 and never have to work late and never have to work weekends, and he can afford a big house and lots of cars and all vacations. And, that is old economy stuff. Okay, boomer. That stuff even before my time. And but that was a different set of circumstances when people had more free time. Nowadays, people tend to work long hours, and so it doesn't leave a lot of free time for anything, including either sex with your partner or others. And that's a big, modern lifestyle challenge for a lot of folks I work with. And I also work with gay couples on what their goals are to alter the type or the frequency or the circumstances of their sex together. And maybe this is the bulk of sex therapy content. Try to reflect and self-assess for yourself about what currently works and what doesn't, both for you and your partner, if you're in a relationship. If you're honest with yourself, think about what's fun, what's fine. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And then think about the areas where you're kind of like, this could use some improvement. The most frequent sex therapy topic that I work with gay male couples or polycules on is frequency of sex. And I had a previous blog article and podcast episode on restoring sex after a long hiatus, the sexual thaw. And if you just think about the immediate future, say the next month or perhaps, this calendar year, this is in 2021, think about what changes would have value and meaning for you, and then see if you can discuss and propose and negotiate those changes with a partner. Nothing has to be written in stone right away, but you're bringing it up for discussion. Hey, I know, how about if we try fill in the blank? Think about how the present might differ from the sexual style that you had with your partner in the past. If you've been together a long time, think about the history of your own sexual life. Has anything changed? If so, what? What kind of changes could you make now that might renovate your sex life to reflect how you relate to one another now? Maybe more infrequent sex is what's comfortable now. Maybe more kinky or edgy sex feels better now because you've gotten complacent and you want to try really edgy things. Think about what changes just might feel good to you. So much of your current sex life is influenced by your past, either in your past relationships that you've had yourself, where maybe you've developed defenses, or the relationships that you observed in your parents or your grandparents or your older siblings. And a lot of times those were heterosexual examples, which don't always completely translate to your gay identity. You probably formed in your past a lot of comforts or discomforts, different values, preferences, and even insecurities based on observing your parents' relationship, because that was the relationship example that would have been the most easy to observe growing up. It would have happened in your own home. Now, you might not have known about the sexual part of it, and thinking about your parents having sex is always kind of weird, but you certainly would have seen relationship dynamics. How do they handle money? How do they handle time? How do they handle food? How do they handle conflict? How do they handle responsibility? All those would be variables that you would have observed. Or was there even a relationship there? Were you raised by a single parent and you saw them dating or going without and just being single while raising you? So sometimes you have to think critically about the other relationships in your family and think about which values you observe that you want to mimic and keep for your own as an adult, and which dynamics you want to leave behind. Your own culture, national origin, spirituality, religion, personality, that would also inform your style of relationships, as well as what therapists call your primary attachment style. Attachment style is something that's used by therapists, and it's a theory that says, different people have different styles of how they attach to other people in general, in the interpersonal relationships of their life, either secure attachment, avoidant attachment, insecure attachment, chaotic attachment. There's a lot of different discussion on that. Traumas and even personality disorders, the narcissistic, the borderline, all the others, those would also influence your relationship outlook and your skills. Relationships and even sexual expression are often the area where our insecurities and our vulnerabilities and our psychological defenses play out the most vividly. And sometimes the function and purpose of either individual therapy or conjoint therapy or sex therapy can be to shed light on what kinds of historical influences in your own biography are at work and affecting your present-day sexuality. And these can be moved from working in the back of your mind unconsciously, where it's doing things to you about your decisions and your behavior you're not even aware of, and they're operating in the background outside of your own awareness, to being discussed in the here and now. But unlike the old school pathologizing anti-gay attitudes of bigoted psychoanalysts in the past, there was a lot of anti-gay stuff from psychoanalysts in the mental health field historically until after homosexuality was removed from the list of diagnoses in 1973. And, your past does not influence your overall sexual orientation. For years they like to say that if you had a domineering mother and all that you would turn out gay. Being gay and having a domineering mother are independent variables. It might form some of your values. It might affect the relationship that you had with your mom. It might inform other kinds of opinions, but it wouldn't actually change your sexual orientation. And it's not something to be fixed. At this point, that's pretty basic, but maybe some of you need to hear that. Sexual orientation is a naturally occurring thing, just like how tall you are or your eye color. Now let's look at other or outside partners. If you are in a consensual, non-monogamous, or open relationship, think about how sex with outside partners fits into your life. Most partners in an open relationship have discussed and implemented a set of ground rules. Sometimes a set of ground rules is arrived at only after much discussion and negotiation and back and forth. And those ground rules guide what kind of partners and circumstances for outside or sex outside the relationship are okay, versus which kinds of behaviors, usually in the other person, are undesirable because they bring about negative feelings of some kind in you. Something about that brings out your insecurity or your jealousy, or what therapists call the abandonment rage. How dare you? The abandonment depression. I don't care. Both of those can be historically in development the infantile response to abandonment, either the rage or the depression. It can bring about sense of loss, almost like a death. Competitiveness. I work with guys a lot who have open relationships. They want to keep score. If you had a hookup, I got to have a hookup because we got to have the same number of outside hookups in the year. That way lies madness. But some gay male couples who are competitive fall into that. Anger or even indifference. I've seen all that probably in the past week with gay male open relationships. And we talk about ways that you could cope with those negative feelings and see if we can find alternatives to feeling bad that way. Sexual involvement with people outside your primary relationship can take many forms. Everything from having a fuck buddy or the paramour. Straight guys would see it as having a wife and a mistress. Gay men might have a partner and a paramour or a boy toy. And this can take many forms, from light flirting with somebody in line at Starbucks, to sexting with other people, to only having 3 ways with your partner, or 4 ways, or group scenes while your partner is present, we call playing together, or sexual experiences that are you or him alone with someone else, playing separately. And think about the venues where this might take place. It could be your home, and there's sometimes ground rules about that. I don't care who you hook up with, but I don't want strange men in our bed. That's a common ground rule. Your home, if you have somebody over, don't use our bed, use the den, or use the office, or use the guest room, something like that. It could be a commercial sex venue, like a sex club or a bathhouse or a dungeon space or some type of group play event. Ever since the advent of either Discovery or Travada as PrEP, gay men's group sexual play events have been popping up really all over the world, especially in big cities. And think about what role outside sex plays for you. Why have an open relationship? Now, that can be variety of sexual experience. It can be variety of partner or type of guy. It can be a sense of adventure. It can be an opportunity to do sexual activities that you don't normally get to do at home, particularly with kink or BDSM dynamics. It might be just the opportunity to meet new people that you find interesting or hot. It could be a sense of experimentation. There might be a sense of fraternal community, like pride, or gay men at a big dance club or dance event or something like that. There's a strong sense of fraternal community, like you might have had a sports team in college or high school, or a fraternity in college, something, or even the military. That would be, a lot of fraternal community. There might be exploration of different parts of yourself. Maybe you're a bottom with your partner, but you're a top with outside partners. Could be a stress release. You might have a demanding job, and playing with others and hooking up is a good way to release stress, just briefly. It could be a sense of respite or recreation. A lot of gay couples that don't play with others in their own hometown, they might play with others while they're away on vacation in some exotic locale where they can be somewhat anonymous. So while any sex with outside partners might not be right for some, there's a lot of couples who'd be like, yeah, thanks, no, we're not doing that. But among a lot of gay male couples, it is fairly common. But having an awareness of what this style of relationship fulfills for you and for your partner can help it to be more rewarding overall. And that's what we mean by what is your quality of sex life when it comes to others, as opposed to partner or self. Let's look at one more thing. Let's look at empowering yourself to feel better, that quality of life about your sex life and your quality of life overall. And I use what's called stop, start, change. One of my trainers at the gym years ago gave me this, and I've always been grateful to learn about it through him because I think it's useful, because it's so behavioral oriented. It's very practical. So in all the areas of your sexual functioning, think about the quality of the experiences that you currently have in terms of their function, their purpose, their rewards, what works, and your challenges, what doesn't quite work. And think about what area of your sex life needs the most attention for targeted change. Where's the rub in all that, so to speak? Think of these also in terms of behaviors that you want to start doing, stop doing, or change how you're already doing them. So what cognitive, thoughts, outlook, interpretation, point of view, understanding, attitudes, and behavioral changes can improve each of those three areas for you? Think about what the sources of any negative feelings are, the things that cause you some kind of a subjective discomfort, and think about how those things could stop. I would feel better if only fill in the blank. What are you curious about, or yearning, or desiring, or craving, and how can you start doing those behaviors, assuming that those behaviors meet the principles of sexual health? What generally works in your sex life but just needs a little fine-tuning, just a little tweaking or adjustment? So when you take the time to self-reflect and reevaluate over a period of time, say a week or a month, both in terms of your individual subjective needs and in the context of a relationship, what comes to mind that you need to give voice or discussion or negotiation to? So maybe you just give voice for that first in therapy or coaching. You talk to a therapist or coach about it and discuss it that way as the first person other than yourself that you're tossing this around with. And then maybe that leads to a discussion with your partner and some things that you want to negotiate. Negotiate what needs to stop, start, or change in the relationship. Charles Darwin is kind of controversially attributed to the quote that said, adaptability across the lifespan strengthens the organism. So allowing for malleability over time is healthy as the variables of your age, health, interests, psychological developmental stages, and environmental context all blend and evolve in terms of who you are. And gay men's sexual mental health is a component of your overall mental health and well-being at any stage of your life, no matter how old you are. The challenges and rewards are different for young men, men at midlife, and seniors, but one thing they all have in common is a relationship to owning, claiming, and enjoying your sexuality over time. So we could say sexual self-empowerment, which is one of my catchphrases, is about challenging this idea that you are somehow miserable and stuck with your circumstances. It takes some work, but just about anything worthwhile does to see results, in your career, in a gym routine, in an artistic project, in your financial life, in developing hobbies or skills. And your sexual expression and sense of the sexual side of yourself deserves the same careful attention as all those other categories. Because just as those things are rewarding, your sex life as a primal drive is also rewarding too. And so you want to give that time and attention as well. So, for more information about me, about my practice, go to gaytherapyla.com. Even though it says LA, I work with guys in other cities and states and even countries if we mind the time zones. And also, there would be other articles on a lot of different topics going back many years, gaytherapyla.com/blog, and other episodes. And I'm putting out a special appeal lately to spread the word. I'd love to have more reviews, especially positive ones, on the podcast because we want to get these episodes out to as many people as might find them helpful. And I would love to hear from you about comments or questions, maybe even suggestions for future blog or podcast topics. And those are probably best on email, ken@gaytherapyla.com. There you go. And then, of course, if you'd like more information, about becoming a client, either for individual therapy, couples therapy, sex therapy, or the coaching services that I do, which is very different, but that's available to guys outside of California, outside the United States, you can text me for more information. That's in the United States at area code 310-339-5778. So 310-339-5778. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.